War is hell. It reaches every hand, from the soldier in the trench to the nurse at his side, from the engineer forging weapons to the families left behind. These are their stories. This is World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. Today's episode, Smoke Over the Harbor. It was the smell of onions that reached him first, then the cod. Fish chowder. He knew it before he stepped inside. Redmond Carmen, who went by the nickname Red, opened the door and entered the small home he shared with his wife and 3 children. The home was a 2-story wooden structure with a small kitchen and dining table on the main floor and a large room for sleeping in an upper loft which was reachable only by a ladder. He removed his hat and placed it on the side table near the door, as he did nightly, and looked around the room. As usual, Margaret, his wife, was tending to dinner near the wood stove in the kitchen. Anna, his 5-year-old daughter, sat in a corner of the room with his son Thomas. They were quietly playing a game of some sort. He did not know or care what. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around his wife from behind. She leaned into him without turning. After 15 years together, they rarely used words to express their love. They didn't have to. He moved to the small table that was the center of the home and took a seat in his customary position. Laid out before him was the evening edition of the newspaper and a cup of coffee. As he picked up the paper, he glanced around the room again. "Is Patrick not home yet?" he asked. Patrick was his oldest son, and at 10 years old he had taken a job as a delivery boy for a local merchant. Margaret, who he had often called Maggie, had been ladling the chowder into a bowl for him, crossed to the table, set it down, and answered, "Not yet. Probably had extra deliveries." "Has he been giving you his wages?" he asked, speaking of Patrick. "He has. That's how I bought the cod." "Very good." He looked down at his bowl. Steam curling from its surface, with soft potatoes and flakes of cod drifting in the thick, milky broth. The table itself only had 3 available chairs, one for him, one for Margaret, and one that was shared by the 3 children who took turns using it, usually with Anna first. It was no different this evening, as Maggie sat down her bowl and then another and called Anna to the table. They sat quietly, yet he could hear Anna slurp at her chowder. She always tried to finish quickly. This made him smile. He heard the front door open and looked over as Patrick entered. He was tall for his age, almost came up to Red's armpits already, which was extraordinary for a 10-year-old. He watched as his son crossed the room and handed his mother something. His wages for the day, most likely. Patrick glanced in his direction, and Red gave him a nod of approval. All of this happened in silence, and silence was what Redmond Carmen needed after spending the day amidst the din of train whistles, people, and the clacking of wheel on rail. It was the subtle smell of coffee that woke him, as it usually did. Red had no internal clock that woke him naturally, but Maggie did, and she used it to her advantage, taking some time to prepare his morning meal. He could hear Anna excitedly helping this morning. He could even hear Maggie talking to Thomas. He sat up in bed and saw Patrick across the room, still asleep on the pallet he shared with his siblings. Rising from the bed, he slipped into his coveralls and shirt, walked to where his son slept, and kicked the pallet. Patrick stirred. "Get up, son. We don't sleep all day." He watched as his son sat up quickly and began to rise. Red did not stay to assure his son did as he was told. He knew that he would. Instead, he made his way to the edge of the loft, turned, and climbed down the ladder. The noise that he had heard just minutes before abruptly stopped. Anna, who had seemed so vibrant and excited, was now subdued. Whatever Thomas had been talking to Maggie about had seemingly been forgotten. Maybe they would pick it up later after he left the house. The morning edition of the newspaper was folded neatly next to a plate of fruit and a cup of coffee. He sat down and began to eat. Patrick ascended the ladder a few minutes later and sat at the shared chair. Maggie put a cup of tea and some fruit in front of him as well. Red watched as Anna pulled on Patrick's sleeve. "Can I have a piece of your apple?" Patrick looked at his father, surprised. This never happened. Anna knew to leave them alone as they ate. Red looked at his son expectantly. Patrick addressed his sister. "You know better. Wait your turn." And he pointed for her to walk away. She did. After breakfast, Red grabbed his hat, kissed Maggie goodbye, and walked out the door. The December air bit at his face the moment he stepped outside. The damp cold settled in quickly, sharp against the skin, as if the wind carried fine pieces of ice with it. The harbor sat just beyond the row of homes, no more than 100 feet away. From his door, he could see the ships moving slowly across the water, coming and going as they always did. He pulled his bicycle from beside the house, climbed on, steadied himself, and started towards the rail yard at Rockingham, the route familiar to him. The streets were uneven beneath his tires. Snow had fallen during the night and packed down in places, turning slick where it had frozen. He kept his pace steady and his eyes on the ground ahead. The road held this morning. It was not as bad as it could be. He made the ride in 30 minutes. The road sloped down towards the station, the building coming into view as he approached. It sat low beside the tracks, a small wooden structure with a wide roof that stretched out over the platform. Beyond it, the rails ran along the water, disappearing in either direction. He brought the bicycle to a stop along the side of the building and set it against the wall. The ground beneath him was packed dirt, worn smooth by wagon wheels and boots. A line of telegraph poles followed the tracks, their wires humming faintly overhead. There was movement, but not much. A wagon stood off to the side. Someone crossed the platform without speaking. The place was already awakening. He stepped away from the bicycle and made his way toward the door. Inside the station was currently quiet. Red could see the freight clerk Samuel Driscoll sitting at a table poring over a stack of manifests. Behind the ticket counter stood the railway supervisor, Elijah Bennett. There were no customers inside. Not yet. Red removed his hat and hung it on a nearby hook, then addressed the room. "Good morning, gentlemen." Samuel looked up from the manifests. "Morning, Red. Rough ride this morning, I bet." It was more a statement than a question. "Actually, not as bad as I expected for the cold." From behind the counter, Elijah joined the conversation. "Still don't understand why you don't move closer to the station, Red." "Well, I would be all for it, but as it stands, we're by Maggie's parents and the school's close. It's not a fun I feel was worth having. Besides, I get here just fine," Red answered. Elijah soon retreated to an adjacent office as Red took his place behind the ticket counter and near the telegraph machine. As usual, the early mornings were active in the station, but relatively quiet as opposed to the afternoons. It was 8:30, and the next train would not leave the station until 9. Red knew that soon people would begin to arrive. Most would already have tickets and would proceed straight to the platform, but some would need to buy tickets, and that's why he was there. Elijah and Samuel would be focused on organizing the load of people and their belongings onto the train. Red had the easier job: sell tickets and answer telegraphs. That was all. Within the next 15 minutes, 7 people bought tickets for the upcoming train. The platform began to see even more activity, about 30 people in all with baggage lined up as they awaited the train's arrival. Red began to notice a commotion on the platform. People, including Sam and Elijah, were staring off into the distance, all in the same direction, towards the harbor. With nobody in the station, he walked around the counter and towards the platform. In the distance, a plume of thick black smoke rose into the air. "What's happened?" he asked no one in particular. It was Samuel who answered. "Not sure. Something is on fire, though." A passenger that Red did not know interjected. Probably nothing." A train horn cut through the curiosity of the crowd as the train drew closer and ended the distraction in the distance. Red retreated back into the station. There were always last-minute travelers who needed tickets, so he needed to be behind the counter. 3 people were waiting for him. There was a few murmurs about the fire in the distance, but not much. As he finished ticketing the final passenger, he heard the sharp, metallic clicks of the telegraph machine begin its irregular cadence. He made his way to the machine, which sat in the corner of the room. He read the message. "Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in the harbor, making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys." He read it again, dropped the paper onto the table, and sprinted towards the platform. The train was already loaded, and the conductors were readying the cars for the train's departure. "Stop the train!" he screamed, and continued to run towards the large black-painted engine at the front. One conductor stepped out of a rail car. "What's going on?" Red continued to run towards the engine, screaming back at the man. "It's going to explode!" as he pointed towards the black smoke in the distance. Finally, he reached the front of the train. There, he saw the familiar window that allowed the engineer to take in cool air, a break from the coal fire directly behind him. The train lurched forward. "Stop!" he screamed at the top of his lungs. The engineer did not react. Red scanned the ground for something to throw. He found a small rock, about the size of a golf ball. He picked it up and hurled it towards the open window. It hit the side of the train and bounced inside the engine. It lurched to a stop. The engineer stuck his head out of the window. "What is the meaning of this?" he yelled. Out of breath, Red put his right hand up to ask for a moment. "What's the hold-up?" the engineer asked. "Just wait," Red said in between breaths. "Just got a telegram." He pointed to the smoke in the distance. "Apparently, that's an ammunition vessel. They think it's going to explode. We were asked to keep you here." No sooner did the words escape him when a bright light filled the sky, followed a moment later by the sound of a massive explosion, then a shock wave that threw him to the ground. Pushing himself up off the ground, he stood and stared off in the direction of the harbor, towards Halifax, towards his home. He watched as more heavy black smoke rose into the air and briefly thought that it seemed to be coming towards them. He looked around now as those from the train began to step off and also look in that direction. He heard his name being called. He turned to see Elijah. "Red, you should go." His voice was urgent. Confused, Red asked, "Why?" He watched as Elijah's face distorted in disbelief. "Your family, Red." Red ran towards his bicycle and hopped on. His pedaling towards home became frantic. He no longer looked for ice or snow on the road. His eyes were set towards the smoke. He made it 3 miles before the extent of the damage became clear. This had not been just any explosion. This had been destruction on a catastrophic level. He was reduced to walking his bike through streets that were now littered with debris. He saw fires in adjacent homes. He saw bodies. He choked on the smoke. His eyes burned. 10 minutes later, he dropped the bike entirely and began to run towards the harbor neighborhood. He tripped over something in the road and fell to the ground, his hands barely catching himself before his face could plant itself onto a piece of smoldering debris. He looked back. It was a body, a young boy. He got up and ran again. He ran 20 feet before he realized that he was already in his neighborhood. He looked at the row of homes along the street. They had been reduced to flattened, smoldering piles of destruction and chaos. He could not even distinguish which house was his. He looked further towards the school. That was gone too. Memories flooded his vision. Maggie's beauty on their wedding day, the way she cooed when he held her, her radiant smile. Thomas, his middle child, he was always so quiet. Did he even have any interests? How did he as a father not know? Anna, the precocious 5-year-old that always did what she was told, all the while testing the boundaries of her family. He turned back to look at the boy he had tripped over just a few moments before. Without thinking, he walked back towards the body. He dropped to his knees next to the boy, the realization hitting him. It was Patrick. He put his arms under his son's head and pulled the lifeless body towards his chest. Tears welled up in his eyes. He barely knew this boy who lived under his roof. He'd barely known Thomas or Anna. He looked back towards the smoldering remains of whichever house was his and the school. And as he knelt there, his son in his arms, he let out a wail as the reality slammed into him. Nobody in this neighborhood had stood a chance. Historical note. On the morning of December 6, 1917, the harbor in Halifax, Nova Scotia became the site of one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. The French cargo ship Mont Blanc, carrying a volatile mix of explosives, collided with the Norwegian vessel Emo in the Narrows. The collision itself was not catastrophic, but it ignited a fire aboard the Mont Blanc as it drifted towards Pier 6. At approximately 9:04 a.m., the ship detonated. The blast devastated much of Halifax North End, killing nearly 2,000 people and injuring thousands more. Entire neighborhoods were flattened. Windows shattered miles away. The force of the explosion was felt far beyond the city. Moments before the detonation, a railway dispatcher named Vincent Coleman made a decision that would save countless lives. From his post at the Richmond Yard, Coleman sent a final telegraph message to warn an incoming passenger train. "Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in the harbor making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys." He remained at his station to send the warning. The train was stopped. Coleman did not survive the explosion, but his message is credited with preventing the loss of hundreds of additional lives. This story is a work of historical fiction. While the characters within it are imagined, the events surrounding the Halifax explosion and the actions of those like Vincent Coleman, who responded in its final moments, are very real. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, where history comes alive through the lives of those who lived it. If this episode moved you, please share it, follow, and leave a rating. Help keep these stories alive. Want to hold these stories in your hand? Explore the books inspired by them, available now on Kindle and in paperback.